I'd like to start probably where you were born.
I came from Boise, Idaho. My parents were living in Mountain Home at the time, but I was born in Boise because Mountain Home was a little tiny town that didn't have a hospital. And my mom, when she knew that birth was imminent, went to Boise and stayed with friends. And then when they took her off to the hospital, they called my dad, and he came running from Mountain Home over to Boise.
Yeah.
And that lane, at that time, it was a 2-lane gravel road between Mountain Home and Boise. Now you got Interstate 84 zipping through there, you know. But it was kind of an ordeal to drive over there.
Yeah.
And my dad had to figure out what he was going to do with my sister, who was 3 years older. And I think she stayed with an aunt, one of my dad's sisters.
Yeah.
At the time, until Dad brought Mom and me home.
Yeah.
But I'm a little vague on that part.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Man, so that you were born in 46? So right after the end of the, or 47?
47, yeah.
So a couple years after the end of the war.
Yeah.
What was life like growing up over there?
Normal, I guess. I don't have much to compare it to. I can remember my folks initially living in we called it the Project, which was some old barracks from the Mountain Home Air Force Base that some guy had moved into town, and they were basically tar paper shacks.
Yeah.
But it was where young couples with no money could live for a while until they get their feet under them. And then they owned a small house. Then they bought a little bit bigger house. And that's the house I remember living in, was the third place they lived. My sister, being a little older, has a better memory of that. And then there was a house that my dad built when I was 5, and that's where I lived until I got out of high school.
Oh, okay.
So that house, I remember it well. But Mountain Home, I always say it was like Mayberry.
Oh, okay.
You know, my dad was a county assessor. The sheriff did not wear a gun.
Yeah.
In fact, I came home from college one time driving into town at night, and there was a roadblock coming into town, and there was a sheriff with a gun on. And I had my girlfriend with me, and I said, well, something's going on here. And I rolled down the window. Earl Winter was the sheriff, and he was an old family friend. I said, what the hell are you doing wearing a gun, Earl?
Yeah.
Oh, there was an escapee from the prison in Boise. We're just checking cars going through, you know. Well, good to see you again. Drove away, you know. And it was that kind of an idyllic small town.
Yeah.
You know, everybody knew everybody. You didn't get away with anything because your mom would find out about it before you got home.
Yeah.
So I guess, you know, and we were in a neighborhood of young families, so we had lots of kids, one of which who ended up being drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team, but he got killed in a logging accident in the off season, so he never really got to fulfill his dream.
Oh, that's too bad.
My best friend, and still my best friend, became a rocket scientist. Another good friend became a lawyer.
Yeah.
You know, I was sort of the black sheep. I went into broadcasting.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, though.
Yeah, I had a good career. I enjoyed it, and it opened up opportunities for me I never would have had otherwise.
What do you think it was about that community that created such, I would say, established people, or you know, people that got so many good opportunities?
I guess it was the freedom to be who you were and become what you wanted to be. A lot of my friends never got past Boise. They never did anything after high school, and they went on to Boise and just found jobs.
Yeah.
Some of us went on to college and had professional careers.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think we were any different than any place else in that regard.
Yeah. You think it was like it seems to be a thing of that time where a lot of kids really, they were visionaries, you know, like they went out and they tried to get what they wanted.
Yeah. And, you know, the parents coming out of the war, a lot of them went back to school on the GI Bill, but they were Depression-era kids.
Yeah.
So they wanted to give their families opportunities they didn't have.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my folks were, you know. They made sure I had opportunities to see and do things that I wouldn't have otherwise done. And it was just, you know, I won't say magical. It wasn't. It's, pardon me, an itch. But it was, I guess, an idyllic situation where you didn't have to worry about crime. Nobody locked their doors. Everybody left the keys in their cars,
Right.
at night, that kind of thing. And like I say, everybody knew everybody, and there was just a spirit of cooperation and getting along. And didn't even have fences in our backyards.
Yeah.
Growing up, we were playing at night across neighbors' yards all the
Yeah.
time, running back and forth, and now you barely know your neighbor. I just left a neighborhood where the only people I knew were the ones next door. Nobody even came over to welcome us to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, we moved here a couple of weeks ago, and within the first week, we'd been invited to some neighbor's house for coffee and pie and get acquainted, and they'd brought in another couple next door. And so, it just feels like we moved home almost.
Yeah, I like to hear that.
Yeah, it's so totally different than what we had. But over in Pasco, I lived in Pasco for over 50 years. And I knew everybody largely because I had been news director at KONA. But even when there's a geodesic dome in Pasco that I built.
Oh, okay.
And that became quite a landmark up there at the time. That was a brand new development for Pasco up in Desert Plateau west of the airport. I built this geodesic dome, and I'm not kidding you, there was a traffic jam every Saturday below my house.
Oh, checking it
as
out.
I was building it, because you could be on Canal Drive in Kennewick and see it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was all bare plywood on the outside yet before I'd shingled it, And I tell you, people were flocking to it. That developer, that was the best advertising he could have had.
Yeah.
For people, because there were a lot of vacant lots. I think I was like the fourth house up there.
And it's still out there?
Oh, yeah.
I bet you we could pull it up.
Yeah, and it's...
What's it called?
It's 4715 Mojave Drive.
You can go under...
Yeah, if you want to find it on Google Earth, it's there. And then after my kids left home, my wife and I downsized and moved just a few blocks to the west into a single story. The dome was three levels, 4,000 square feet, big yard, a pool, and when we built it, there was nothing but sagebrush and sand out behind the house. So it was great for the kids to go out and play out there.
Just terrorize,
Yeah, without hurting a darn thing, and they had all kinds of fun out there.
When you were bringing up how safe and secure you guys felt growing up, I think about that to this day with, it seems like people have this fear of their safety. And I always worry about how you wonder if they spend so much brain time thinking about that or worrying about that they are not using that time for something productive. Your security is really what gives you freedom, to be a visionary or to chase your ambitions or whatever it is. That's why I always feel bad when you see the breakdown in security around communities. It's really, I don't think people think of the butterfly effect of that impact of what it does to somebody's future. When you're worried about, your kids being outside or things like that, instead of being able to be like, go live life, go experience things. You're always worried about somebody's going to be taken or, who knows?
Well, you look what's happened with the advent of the Ring doorbell and all the porch pirates that are running around, that really gives you a pause.
Yeah.
And society has simply changed since I grew up, or even since I moved to Tri-Cities in the early 70s. It's changed. And that's a fact of life. Yeah.
Do you reflect on that quite a bit as you get...
I think about it from time to time, yeah. I'm fortunate now. My kids are gone, so I don't have to worry about a lot of that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
So I don't get too spun up about it, but I do kind of grieve for the society these days. And I know my wife is constantly worried about break-ins or theft or stuff, and it's stuff I never have worried about.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's too bad that people have to spend their time worrying about stuff like that. I'm hoping it comes around. I have daughters, and I always kind of worry about that with females, being more susceptible to that type of, crimes and things. You said you getting out of school, you went to college and became a broadcaster. What did that have to do with listening to the radio when you were young at all?
Totally. My mom would tell you, by the time I was 5 years old, I knew two things with certainty. I was going to be on the radio. I was going to fly. Those were two givens, and those are really what have guided my life since. I grew up listening to soap operas on the radio. And that's what I always thought I wanted to do. I wanted to write radio plays. That's what got me interested in the first place. Was I wanted to write that stuff.
Yeah.
And I finally got the opportunity in a slightly different way. But when I was 16, the Robert Frost writes about the road not taken. The road that I didn't take was aviation. Because I never wanted to make a living as a pilot. That was never my goal. I wanted to fly, but not become a professional pilot. I wanted to be a professional broadcaster. Yeah. So by the time I was 16, almost the same week, I had an offer from the local flying service. It was owned by a close friend of my father, to come out and go to work scrubbing airplanes and fueling airplanes and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I had an offer from the local radio station. And I opted for the radio station because if I'd have gone the aviation route, I'd have probably ended up becoming a crop duster pilot eventually, and that sort of thing. And that wasn't really the kind of life I wanted. But I did want broadcasting. And, 16-year-old kid in high school, that gives you a certain stature in school because I'm the kid on the radio,
Yeah.
And we were the only station in town people could listen to at night. And I was running the rock and roll music and that sort of thing. So I had a bit of a following. And then, the bottom line of my life always has been I'm a writer. And broadcasting, I was writing initially commercials and being on the air as a disc jockey. And then I went to college. I made a mistake studying to be an electrical engineer when I had no aptitude for science and math and physics. And 2.5 years I flunked out and went to work for a guy that I'd worked for in Mountain Home. I went to work for him in Twin Falls, Idaho. And then shortly after that, I went to the TV station next door because I knew I was going to eventually lose my job at the radio station. And I was working, they hired me as a reporter. I'd never done that kind of thing before, but I got to use a video camera, shooting film. And we developed our own film, and that was kind of fun, and it really attracted me. And I got to do some serious writing in the news stories. Yeah. And I can, to this day, remember sitting in the newsroom. I was producing the 11 o'clock news, writing my newscast, and it was like I got hit with a bolt of lightning. Yeah. That this is where I needed to go, but I needed a degree to get there.
How did that feel? You said it felt like being hit with a bolt of lightning, but did it feel so pure, like your character? Like, do you remember the feeing?
Yeah,
or how would you describe
totally. It was an overwhelming sensation, I guess, of well-being. It just overwhelmed me. I totally felt it, that I need to go back and get my degree, and this is where I want to take the rest of my life as a journalist. Yeah. And I still, when I was cleaning out my house for my recent move, I came across a letter from my dean at the University of Idaho where I'd written to him after being out of school 18 months. And I said, I fell on the sword, was in the wrong curriculum. I wanted to get back. I know where I want to go now. And I got my head together. There weren't quite the words, but that was the message. And he sent back a nice letter saying, recounting some of my academic failures, which I didn't appreciate. But he said, against my better judgment, I will allow you to come back one more time. Yeah. Because you show some contrition and enthusiasm for what you want to do. So I went back and I was on the dean's list the next 4 semesters.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
I as I'm getting a little bit older, I work with a lot of kids like that are at lower level jobs, financially, and I think even just fulfilling, they're in their young 20s, out of high school, working security or something. And ever since, it took me years to do something that I think what you're talking about, and this is just our passion project, but I since doing this, I know that feeling you're talking about, and I just encourage people constantly to be like, I always ask them, what do you want to do? What do you like to do? There's no way you like doing security working 16-hour days. Right. And so I always try and put that into kids, like, because there's something out there that you're meant for. And I think it's so hard where these kids, I think they're too caught up in probably distractions, and they're not actually sitting down and taking the time to focus on, like, really, who am I? Like, what do I love to do?
Yeah.
Because if you're doing so, you're going to be successful at it, and you'll be rewarded by, like you said, just an overwhelming positive well-being of doing what you feel you should do.
When I was struggling in college, a guy I'd worked for that really, he saved me in a lot of ways, but he became a very close friend. And I said, how do you decide to go where your interests are or where your aptitudes are? And he looked at me and he said, Mike, they're the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought about that for the longest time, and he was dead on. My interest and my aptitude really was in broadcasting, not engineering.
Yeah.
And that was an awakening for me. But by the time I got around to changing my major, I'd already washed out. So, like I say, armed with that in my head, and the realization of finally got the opportunity I needed and to get me in the right direction, things started working out. I worked at a TV station in Boise for a while, and they begged me to stay. I was going to go back to the university to finish my degree, and they were begging me to stay, finish my degree down there. And I said, no, I've got a commitment at the University of Idaho. I'm going to do it there. And that turned out to be a good enough move for me. I went up there. My first job out of college was news director at a TV station in Lewiston, Idaho.
Yeah.
And it was a small operation. It was just me, basically, as the news department. But it was a good place to get started. And then I got an offer from the University of Idaho radio and TV department to come to work there after a year in Lewiston. They'd gotten a bunch of federal money and were doing some live public affairs programming and wanted me to come up and work on that. And the guy that hired me, it turned out, wasn't the person I ended up working for. I was working for one of his staff, a woman that I didn't care for much, and she didn't like me either.
Yeah.
And my wife—
It's funny how that works out.
Yeah. And my wife was working at the university as a graphic artist for radio and TV, and that wasn't working out well either. So we'd been there about 6 months, and we decided we were going to leave. And I called my old boss down in Lewiston and asked if he knew anything. And he said, no, I'll keep my ear open. Next thing I know, I get a phone call from KONA Radio here in Pasco. And the thing is, the Lewiston station had belonged to the same company that owned Kona and Keeper TV and stations up in Yakima. So there was a connection there, and the guy from Kona Radio, the program director named Lloyd Amon, called me and asked me to come over and interview. And my wife and I zipped over here for a weekend, interviewed, and 2 days later I was offered the job and came back here. That was in the spring of '73, I think March. And I worked at Kona, for 16 years.
Oh, wow.
And that was back when radio around here did legitimate news.
Oh, I bet.
And we were very competitive. The FCC, Federal Communications Commission at the time, the licenses are issued to serve in the public interest. And that meant fairness. Mm-hmm. There was the fairness doctrine and the equal time provision.
Yep, I was going to ask about that.
You have somebody on one side of a political issue, you will have somebody on the other side. And we had a lot of public affairs programming at Kona because the owner, the guy that ended up owning the station, Dean Mitchell, really believed in that serving the public interest notion. It wasn't just there to line his pockets. It was to serve the community. And we all felt that, and we did a very good job. Well, when Ronald Reagan was president, Donald Rumsfeld, who was in Congress, and Dick Cheney, who was on his staff at the time, they came to Reagan and convinced him to do away with the equal time provision and the fairness doctrine so that they could have free access to the airways without fear of anybody fact-checking them or contradicting them. And that's basically what's given rise to the polarized news media that we have today, was that decision. And it still galls me in what it did for radio stations and TV stations. A lot of radio stations just flat out eliminated their news operations because they didn't need to have them anymore to maintain their license. So a lot of radio people around here lost their jobs. But Dean, as I said, at Kona, he believed in serving the community, and that meant a very robust news department. And we were extremely competitive. And I was bucking 18 people at the Tri-City Herald. They had 18 reporters on the street. And it was just me and a guy that was part-time news, part-time sports. So it was a struggle just to keep up with the newspaper. And there were several times when I was able to get ahead of them, and not just on a wreck or a fire. That doesn't count. But I'm talking about a major story where I could be ahead of them by a day. Was just gleeful.
Yeah.
And I always say my favorite story was I broke the story that the Tri-City Herald had been sold. And they were trying to keep that a secret for a while. And I got a tip, and I called. I don't know how much detail you want about this, but I still find it amusing. The Herald was sold to the McClatchy News Organization out of, I think, Sacramento. And they owned a series of B newspapers, Sacramento Bee and this station, newspaper B and whatever. And McClatchy was a good, solid, journalism-based organization. They weren't a separate corporation that happened to own newspapers. And I called down there to try to reach McClatchy for an interview, and damned if he didn't answer the phone. When his secretary answered, and I said I wanted to talk to whatever McClatchy's first name was, he picked up the phone.
Yeah.
And I identified myself and said, understand you just bought the Tri-City Herald? And he said yes. And it's turned out the only reason he picked up the phone is he thought I was somebody else.
Yeah.
That he was waiting for a phone call. And so anyway, I got a great interview out of the guy about, why he bought the Herald and what he was going to do with it, and that sort of thing. And he maintained the journalistic excellence of that paper because they've always been good.
Oh, good.
Until it got taken over by an investment company, and then it went downhill. But it's coming back, and I'm delighted to see it. The Herald is really doing good journalism these days.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yes. So you believe that financial gain took away the integrity of a lot of the newspapers or journalism in general?
Yeah, just look what happened with the Washington Post.
Yeah.
They wouldn't endorse Kamala Harris because Jeff Bezos didn't want to upset Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because he has other business interests that are directly tied to the federal government.
Right.
And I'm a firm believer in independent journalism.
Yeah.
People whine about the liberalism of the Washington Post and the New York Times. Well, fine, there's the Washington Times out there, too, that's on the other side of that spectrum. There was the New York Times, and the New York Post. There were other newspapers out there that represented other viewpoints.
Right.
But that's the hallmark of our country, is an independent news source. How else are you going to keep your public officials accountable if you don't have honest, hardworking journalists on the street?
Right.
And, you think about it right now. I used to be in City Hall around here, all three city halls on a regular basis. I just stroll in, see if the city manager was available and chat, fire chief, the police chief, secretaries. I built up a very strong network of contacts, and they trusted me and they respected me because I treated them fairly. And you find a journalist today that does that, they don't exist.
Right.
I don't even think the Herald has the staff to have beats anymore like they did. Annette Carey does a superb job of covering Hanford. And I think she could pick up the phone and call anybody on the Hanford site, and they would take her call. But if somebody from KNDU called, they'd say, go talk to our PR department.
Right.
It just modern broadcast journalism, in my view, is just not what it used to be.
Right.
Let's leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Wayne.
Would you agree with the statement that modern broadcast journalism is more entertainment than information nowadays?
Yes, I would. And what I see, because you can tell it, they follow the newspaper to begin with. Broadcasters have always gotten their news out of the newspaper. And that doesn't matter if it's 60 Minutes or KEPR or KONA, and I'm as guilty of that. But I always rationalized it because I didn't have the staff to be out there all the time. It was just me. So you have to rely on the print. But you see a lot of news conferences, news releases that are handed out. I mean, give me a break. When Chick-fil-A coming to town is a news story, if I were the local franchise owner of Burger King, I'd be a little upset.
Right?
Why are you giving Chick-fil-A all this free publicity
Yeah.
and I've got to pay for it?
Yeah.
Or Two Boys In and Out. That was statewide news that one of those is coming to the west side.
Yeah.
Seriously? That's what, is news these days. I don't dig it at all.
Yeah.
Do you think that we'll ever see a day where we get back to that information-based news?
I keep hoping so, but the thing is, social media has so fragmented the audience now.
Mm-hmm.
Look where young people get most of their news. It's off TikTok.
Right.
And to some extent, Facebook. It's absurd.
Yeah.
Anybody to me that complains about biased news media, my standard response is get online with the Associated Press. I've been affiliated with them since I started in broadcasting, and they are a fair and honest source of news. And they send out news releases or news updates on email. They're on Facebook. You can log in on their website. It's all free, but it's honest, straightforward news coverage.
Yeah.
And that has always been my go-to source for news.
Yeah, I like that. Was there a time in journalism where didn't the newspapers used to have, it was basically informational based, and then they brought in the opinion section of the newspaper, or there'd be opinion pieces?
Right.
Do you think, was there always opinion pieces, or was it funneled into journalism later on?
Always. They call it the op-ed page, the opinion and editorial page. And that's where you would see endorsements. That's where the letters to the editor are. Every newspaper had or still has an op-ed section. Even the Tri-City Herald, it's online now. But I read the paper every day.
Yeah.
And, that's how you find out what's going on in your community.
Yeah.
Long time ago, a guy in the local, with the Benton Franklin Council of Governments, pardon me, I got an itch. He always, I don't think he was paid very much because he was always looking for somebody to buy him a free lunch. Yeah. And he called me up and said, why don't you take me to lunch? I got some ideas for you. And I said, okay. So I paid for his lunch. But the thing that came out of that was he asked me, do you ever read the public, which is not the public notices, but the, where, a lot of the, near the back of the page where the cities publish.
Like all the arrests and everything like that?
Not so much that as it is the building permits, that sort of thing. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, I said, no, I don't. And he said, you really should, because that's where a lot of the news really is. Oh. So I started doing that, and the classified ads, that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, yeah.
So I just got in the habit of every day reading the classifieds. And in there, you'll find the cities and the ports publishing all these notices that are required by law about requests for building permits or projects, the city council agendas and that sort of thing, So if you read the classifieds, you'll find out a lot about the detail of what's going on in your community.
Yeah.
And I still do that.
I think when I changed my name in high school to my mom's maiden name, I think it was put in the paper because they have to put it out there in case somebody objected.
Yes.
Because there was nobody to object in court. So they must be in that section of the paper.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
It's always in the classifieds. And, it's either city ordinance or state law that a lot of that has to be published.
Yeah.
It makes sense. And when people I see on some of the social media are whining about why did it cost that much or how did they sneak that by, I will remind them that it's public record. If you would read the newspaper, and of course most people don't bother, that if you read the newspaper or, go to city council meetings or that sort of thing, you'll find out all kinds of stuff going on in the community. It didn't sneak anything by. It was right there. But communication is a two-way street. Right.
And I think that's something that's generational that we've definitely, I can sit in here listening to you. I'm like, I don't even know the last time I've opened a newspaper, and I remember my grandpa sitting in his chair almost every day reading the newspaper.
Yep.
And I appreciate that you said that because it puts the weight back on us that we have the opportunity to review these things, be a part of the meetings, go to city council, but we're too busy caught up in our own lives or whatever we're doing where we don't make that a priority to review and make an impact on it.
All the time.
So we really don't have a right to argue, I guess, too much.
That's it. All the time I was at KONA, I can remember twice the city council chambers being packed for a council meeting. The first one was when a guy from the Port of Pasco came in with a proposal to change the names of the streets. Pasco was a hodgepodge. The street north-south most of them were numbered, but the other ones, it was quite a mess. The only other time was when they fired the golf pro, and he was the golf coach from Pasco High also for their golf club. Those are the only two times anybody ever really bothered in numbers to come to a city council meeting.
Yeah.
Change the street names and fire the golf pro.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Or think of all the major things that happened that somebody could have came in and gave their opinion on or
that's it.
Supported or objected.
And then a few years later, a few months later, the council, when nobody was watching, did indeed change the street names.
Yeah.
Because it was a good idea.
Yeah.
But because the county had the road numbers west of 44, so Pasco kind of had to meet that. So they backed it up from 44 to all the way over to 4th.
Yeah.
Like 20th used to be Chase. And 14th was Lucas. And those are the only two I remember. But that was a result of, like I say, the guy, he was one of the second-tier managers he wasn't the port manager, but he was like their industrial development coordinator, something like that. Anyway, he came to the council one night with a proposal to rename the streets. And when, people found out about that, they just crammed in there. Don't you dare do it. We've got to do this and we got to do that. And it would be terribly expensive. And
people don't like change too much.
No.
they get set on that. Especially this is probably before. People probably back then. How long ago was this?
No, this was in the 70s. Bryce Hall was the guy's name.
What's crazy about that is that street names back then were probably so important to people's memorization to where now, like my generation, they don't care one bit because they just care about left and right from Siri.
That's it, And I don't remember the first name, but Sylvester was one of the big land developers in Pasco. So a lot of the street names are named for his family.
Oh.
There's Pearl and trying to think what else is out there. But anyway, those were named for his family members.
Right. What were some of the major events that you remember covering?
George H.W. Bush coming to town. I remember that.
Did you get to sit down with him?
No. We did have a news conference at the Red Lion.
Okay.
But didn't get a sit-down opportunity with him. There was my first experience with the Secret Service out at the airport. And I won't say it was lax, but it wasn't what it is today. But we all gaggled up at the base of the control tower.
Yeah.
And Air Force Two came in, and we got to watch him. And we didn't get to talk to him until he got over to hotel. And then if you carried a still camera, the guy made you look at it and click it to make sure it wasn't a hidden gun or something.
Right.
And these were the uniform division of the Secret Service.
Right.
Okay. Another big one was the dedication of the cable bridge. That was always an interesting experience, getting that built. The eruption of Mount St. Helens, I had an airplane at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And I was able to fly over there and do live reports. We had communications equipment that it was portable, but I put in the back seat of the airplane. Instead of a two-way radio, it was a one-way.
Yeah.
But it broadcast back to the station on our frequency, and I was able to do live reports of the eruption.
How long after? Is this while it was still going?
Well, it was going on.
Do you remember the name of the lady and gentleman that were flying the Cessna over Mount St. Helens when it erupted? And I think they lost like 2,000 feet of elevation from the blast.
No, I didn't.
I watched a thing on it. It was wild. That was on my grandma's birthday, 1980.
Well,
so let's see.
May 18th.
Yep, 37. So she would have been, 43? Yeah, it would have been my grandma's 43rd birthday.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
I had a friend that was a Blue Angel pilot, in fact, and he was on a flight from Portland to Seattle in a just a Hughes Air West DC-9.
Yeah.
And he was sitting there as the plane was going by Mount St. Helens, looking out the window and watched it blow. And the plane ended up getting a lot of ash damage on the engines. It landed safely.
Yeah.
But they ended up having to re-engine that airplane.
Oh, I bet.
And, as soon as I got back from my flight, I went into the hangar and changed the oil.
Right.
We got just a dusting here, nothing significant.
Can you describe that flight over there? Like, what was your anticipation you took off from Tri-Cities?
Yeah.
What kind of plane were you in?
I was in a Cessna 172 that
Okay.
I owned. Yeah. I didn't have any idea. I was just backing out of the driveway when heading for the airport to work on some air show things, because I produced the air show here. And my wife came running out to the deck, waving at me, and said, Roger just called. And Roger was our Sunday morning disc jockey. Said, Roger just called. The mountain just blew. I said, what does that mean? She said, I don't know, but that's what Roger told me.
Yeah.
And we kind of knew Mount St. Helens was getting close to an eruption. So I just headed out the airport. I went by the radio station, picked up a radio, and by then I'd been hearing reports. Went out the airport and threw the radio on the plane, and off I went. And the way the ash cloud was, Oregon was in sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
So all the way flying west to Mount St. Helens, I had sunshine on my left wing, and I always knew if it got a little dicey in Washington, I could fly into Oregon and land safely somewhere. My wife would have to drive down and get me maybe, but depending on what happened here. But anyway, fortunately, that never happened. And they had a 25-mile exclusionary ring around the mountain. But that was the most mesmerizing thing, watching that column of black-gray material spewing up out of that mountain like there was never going to end. It just kept going and going, and it was absolutely mesmerizing.
I bet.
I was flying straight into it. I would have gone right into it.
Was the lightning white? You could see all the lightning and
I
everything?
didn't ever see any lightning. It was too early. That started happening in the higher elevation and a little bit later.
So did you have oxygen on your airplane, or were you flying, what were you flying, like 10,000, 11,000?
Oh, gosh, no, I wasn't that high. It wasn't even 5,000.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have to be any higher than that.
Right.
And I flew right up to that 25-mile ring and turned around and had to come home. And, again, staying south of that edge of the cloud, Yakima, our station there was, Yakima was pitch black.
Yeah, they were right in it.
Yeah, and the poor girl that was news director, they were an NBC affiliate where we were ABC here. And she called NBC in New York and trying to explain to them what was going on and give them a story. And they were saying, we'll get stuff on the air as soon as we know about it. They thought it was just somebody calling for information. And she said, no, you don't understand. It's dark here. And said, yeah, lady, we're all in the dark. But we'll
3 hours
get
later.
information on as soon as we can, and hung up on her. She
Yeah.
was trying to give them a first-person story,
Yeah.
and they didn't quite understand it.
Yeah.
And,
There's not many volcanoes over on the East Coast.
no. And we had close friends that were up in Spokane while all that was going on, and they were trapped up there for 3 days. And then Union Pacific put on a special train to get people out of Spokane because the highways were shut down. And I can remember my friend Helens saying when they came into town, the train track goes right by the golf course, says, here's people out there golfing as if nothing had happened. She said, I got so mad after what we'd gone through in Spokane. Because it shut down that whole city for days.
Yeah.
And she said, and here are people golfing like nothing had happened and had no appreciation for what we went through.
Right.
It was so funny listening to her side of that story.
Yeah.
And
It's funny how everybody experiences things like that differently or looks at them differently. Like where my family's from, they're not far from that mountain as a crow flies. My family lives right on the base of Mount Adams.
Oh, wow.
And so my grandpa had a logging outfit, so they got behind the gates and got up on a hill.
Yeah.
And they were looking right at it.
Man.
And they said the lightning was just, the whole thing was just mesmerizing. Then I also know a guy, his grandparents, they died in it. They were, if I remember the story right, I think he was the equipment foreman for a logging outfit somewhere over there by Longview. And they went up to check on the equipment. Well, they were taken out by it must have been a Lahar or something came in and got them from overheating the snow, and then
Yeah.
the snow came down through a canyon and got them.
The eruptive history of every mountain in the Cascade chain is well documented. There's a tremendous book out there called Fire and Ice that documents the eruption of every single one of the Cascade volcanoes from British Columbia all the way down into California. And the fact that the volcano erupted the way it did shouldn't have surprised anybody.
Right.
The trouble is the exclusionary zone that was put up around it before the eruption favored Weyerhaeuser logging and allowed them to log certain areas that they never should have been allowed into. And that's why some of those people died.
Yep. There
were other people who just simply violated the closure and went in anyway and paid a dear price for it.
That's called natural selection.
Yeah. Weed out the dumb ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That mountain erupted back my senior year of high school again, 2005.
Wow.
I was playing baseball in Trout Lake. And Mount St. Helens is right there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's 20 miles as a crow flies, maybe 25.
Wow.
And I remember we could hear something. Yeah, you should pull it up, actually. Yeah, 2005 Mount St. Helens eruption. And I just remember, we thought we had heard something and never thought anything of it. We're playing baseball, and we're right there in a valley, high Cascade Valley.
Yeah.
And we looked up, and there was, it was a huge mushroom cloud in the 2005 eruption. I couldn't imagine the 1980 eruption.
Yeah.
It had to be one of the most remarkable things ever seen. And it had to be actually in the United States at that time. That was the only one, right? That was the only eruption since we had been a country.
Yeah, right. And
that was 2004.
Okay. And it's funny because I don't remember that one. There was one right after, I think, either late 80 or 81, where another eruption occurred, and that ash cloud went down over Portland. Because Portland was spared the first eruption.
Right. It went up through Yakima, Moses Lake, Spokane, right?
Yeah, it all went to the northeast. But the next one was a piker by comparison.
Right. That's like this one.
Yeah, and I went over again and watched that one with my airplane.
Talking about flying, how do you describe flying, like the experience of flying your own aircraft compared to, for people that don't, a lot of people have never been in a small plane like that. And I think I've done it quite a bit. My buddy has a 180 and we used to fly around quite a bit. And I think it's just remarkable.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a feeling, there are technical pilots and there are people that fly by the seat of their pants. But you still, anymore, you've got to be a technical pilot as well. But there's that magic moment when you leave the runway and the wings take over. And there's no sensation like it, no matter how many times you've flown.
Yeah.
You're rolling down the runway, you reach the right speed, you bring the nose up, and you just simply fly.
Yeah.
And it's, at that point, an airplane becomes an airplane. And anybody competent at that point can fly a 747 or a Piper Cub. The trick is taking off and landing.
Yeah.
But, and granted, the more complex the airplane, the more systems you got to know about. And my youngest son is a helicopter pilot.
Okay.
And he flies the kind of helicopters that they move the president around in, a big Sikorsky. And he had to they call it a type rating. You don't just learn to fly it and go fly it. The more complex the airplane, the more you have to know about its system. So when he got his type rating, they said, draw out the electrical system for me. And he drew out all the major components and then show me which ones talk to each other and then what happens if this component fails. And then you got to know your hydraulic system. And every other system in the aircraft you have to know. And same thing with the airline, what those pilots go through to get their type rating in a 737 or a 747 or an Airbus A320. They are incredibly complex airplanes. The training manual, like for an A320, is 1,000 pages. You have to know it intimately. The training, they send you off to school, and the training is intense. And not everybody makes it.
Right. Yeah, you literally have to know it like your life depends on it.
Because it does.
Yeah, and many others.
There's a an old adage in aviation, preservation of thine ass will likewise ensure that of thy passenger.
Yeah.
And I've always subscribed to that.
Yeah, I like that.
So a buddy of mine used to razz me a little bit about how thoroughly I did my walk around before I'd ever get in the plane and take off, and it gave him a great deal of confidence in flying with me.
Yeah, the last thing you want that to be is your last walk around.
That's the truth.
Yeah, that's I know exactly what you're talking about because I've messed around with an airplane, never got my license, but with my buddy and stuff, and I just remember every time, as scatterbrained as I am, when every time we'd walk around that aircraft, it was 2 or 3 trips around it, especially because he owned it.
Yeah,
and then when we rented one a couple times. It was a couple extra walk arounds because you didn't know who was flying that plane. You didn't know who was telling the truth about it before.
Yeah.
You don't know who worked on it. Where they had they had a pilot that their family had hired, and it's remarkable. I can think of. Have you flown into Ranger Creek by Mount Rainier, the old Forest Service paved runway?
No.
If you ever want to go over towards Mount Rainier, it's a cool runway. It's a paved runway the Forest Service used right on the north side of Mount Rainier.
Oh.
Really neat place to go into, right by the river there. We used to love flying in there.
Yeah. I did a lot of backcountry flying in Idaho, but
yeah,
my wife, my first wife, wasn't too crazy about flying to begin with, and the thought of going into a mountain strip like that would never sit well with her. So I had some friends that I flew with around here, and we'd go over to northern Idaho and go into strips to go fishing.
Oh yeah,
we do that kind of thing.
Were you a part of the Idaho backcountry? What is it? Idaho Backcountry, is it Pilots or Flyers or Club?
No, I haven't been involved with them.
I've seen some of their videos where they're flying cubs around. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I've gone into some of those places. I got a friend in Boise with a variety of airplanes, and he took me into a strip where there's a big lodge with cabins, and they do breakfast every morning, and you don't get a menu. You just put $20 down and get a pile of food, whatever they're serving that day. But it'll always be bacon and sausage and pancakes and eggs and hash browns or whatever else goes with it. It'd be a big plate of food for your $20.
Where's that at?
It's somewhere east of Boise.
Okay.
Northeast of Boise, and I can't even remember the name of the creek right now.
Okay.
But we flew in there, and there were several airplanes tied down there. It's about the only way you can get in there unless you hike or take a horse, But it's pretty isolated. But those are the fun trips.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that stuff. Have you flown over to Copalis, Washington? Land on the beach over there?
No, most of what I've flown here has been in eastern Washington.
Oh, okay.
I've gone over to the west side with friends for different reasons, but primarily most of my flying here has been on this side of the state.
Yeah, it's a unique state to fly in. Washington is so beautiful.
Yeah, and
you like go from the coast to eastern. To see the change in terrain and vegetation is incredible.
And as air traffic has increased here and regulations have changed, flying in and out of Pasco is a much more complicated situation than it used to be.
Yeah.
When I came here, there wasn't even a control tower. That was put in '74, I believe. I got to know one of the controllers pretty well. And or maybe it was '72 it was put in. Anyway, and they were daylight only, like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. kind of thing. And you'd get clearance to take off or land, and that was the last time you had to talk to them.
Yeah.
You could fly anywhere. Well, now you take off, and they switch you to a control center in Spokane called Chinook, either Chinook approach or departure. You're talking to them. They'll do flight following and monitor where you are, and you got to be talking to them all the time about any changes or deviations. And I used to be able to go out and fly over Hanford right over the top of the sagebrush if I wanted to.
Yeah.
As long as you stay clear of the buildings and stuff out there. But when I came here, in fact, in '73, there were airspace restrictions over Hanford. You couldn't go below 10,000 feet. And
is that in case somebody was spying on them, taking pictures and stuff? Or
no, I can make some accusations, but basically they didn't want to change the rules. During the war, you couldn't fly out there, which made sense.
Yeah.
But after the war, there was no valid reason. They just didn't want to change it.
Okay.
And there were several of us in the media that were starting to ask that question: why do you have that restriction? Because for the airlines, it's a 10,000-foot mountain out there. You take off from Pasco,
Yep.
you got to make a wide path to north or south
Yeah.
to get around Hanford. And it was an annoyance and burning extra fuel. Well, we started pressuring the FAA. Why do you have that closure there? FAA doesn't like restricted airspace. They got to monitor it, manage it. So we're asking them, why do you have that? And they were scratching their head. Well, the Department of Energy asked for it. So we'd go to the Department of Energy. Why do you have that? And this is at a time when they were trying to convince you that nuclear energy was safe. And they were saying, well, in case something happens out there. Well, wait a minute. That conflicts with your public posture about the safety of nuclear. And there were probably some legitimate security concerns from the early days. But anyway, they couldn't come up with justification, so they finally removed that restriction.
Yeah.
And then we were able to just fly out there. And God, I thought that was wonderful. I get to go see Hanford for the first time, because as a reporter, we were out there occasionally, but not nearly enough to understand the site or know what was going on.
Right.
Having an airplane to fly over there was kind of fun.
Oh, I bet.
And then I went to work out there.
Yeah.
So,
that's cool. Where did your family's aviation, I guess it wasn't an addiction, but appreciation come from?
Well, my dad and my mom, both of them, all they ever wanted to do was fly. That was a given. My dad wanted to do it for a living. My mom wanted to do it for fun. And my dad got his licenses he was a commercial pilot before he was 21.
Wow.
And in Boise. And he became an instructor right after that. My mom, she just wanted to fly for fun, but she ended up getting her commercial ticket.
Yeah.
And was the first woman in Idaho with a commercial rating. And that's where she and my dad met at the flying service where they were both flying. And then my dad got called to service in World War II, but because he was born in Spain, they wouldn't let him leave the country. So they sent him to Texas as an instructor instead of sending him to Europe as a fighter pilot. And so he taught a lot of people to fly.
Oh, wow.
And I always say he saved George Bush's life. Any other instructor could have made the same claim if it were a different one. But my dad was teaching this guy named Nat Adams how to fly. And Nat joined the Navy and ended up as George Bush's wingman. And George Bush got shot down over an island out in the Pacific. And in this particular location, the Japanese had this big relay station on this island, so a lot of Navy pilots were going to set in to blow it up. And Bush was one of them. And they had a Navy submarine stationed right near that island so that if a pilot gets shot down, he could glide out into the bay and the submarine would pick him up. Well, a lot of the pilots never got that far, and the Japanese captured them. But Bush was able to nurse the airplane out far enough for the submarine to pick him up. But in the meantime, before the sub got there, the Japanese kept coming out to get Bush, and Nat Adams kept strafing him and destroying the boats that were trying to capture him. So he saved Bush's life, and he ended up with a Distinguished Flying Cross for his efforts for staying there. And that's about one notch below a Medal of Honor.
That's incredible.
So that was quite a deal. And somewhere along the line, Nat got a second Distinguished Flying Cross that his family had no idea about, because after the war, he put all that in a box and put it in the basement, and went on, got his architecture degree, and was a very well-known architect in Idaho. And his family was cleaning out his stuff, and they came across all this stuff. And they said, holy cow, where'd this come from?
Yeah.
They never even knew about the second one because he didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
And nobody thought to ask him.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
That's, It's,
but, my son.
I feel so lucky that we get to have the curiosity. Like, my generation is so much, I guess maybe we probably talk a little too much or ask too many questions. But we consistently hear that through these interviews that people are like, well, we never thought to ask.
Yeah.
Because you were just kind of kept silent,
That's
or
it.
whether you knew it or not.
And, and all these fathers of my friends that I grew up, I mentioned Murray Kidd was a POW. The father of another friend was a POW. I had one uncle that was in the Battle of the Bulge, that nasty winter, It was brutal. He'd wake up after the war. He'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming and having nightmares.
Yeah.
Another uncle was in the 10th Mountain Division, and that sort of thing. And never thought to ask him about it as we were growing up. It's just something that's your dad or your uncle. You didn't even worry about it because you weren't curious about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I suppose it would have been interesting if we'd had a school assignment. Go talk to your dad about World War II, or an uncle or a friend, We'd have gotten a lot more familiar with that than I wished we would have.
Right.
It would have been good,
Yeah. Well, it's nice that we at least now get to sit down with people like you and get, the second story, secondhand story of it at least give them some respect for what they did, because it really was remarkable. I think about how fast time went by, like you think from the Wright brothers to, pilots in the World War II, that was not a big jump in time. No. I mean, it's just really remarkable. I always look at aviation too, like you talk about as soon as you get the wheels off the ground, how, then you're flying.
Yeah.
How, think about all the people that have ever lived. Flight is still such a new thing.
Yeah.
It's just incredible to me what we've accomplished in that short amount of time.
And then you look at what happens at a modern day air show and what pilots are able to do with a modern airplane. I narrate air shows professionally, and it still astounds me what I see.
Yeah.
Because in the early days of air shows, pilots are able to do a loop and a roll and very little else, because that's all the airplane could take.
Yeah, and some of them would stand up on the airplane, right? You'd
then you got the wing walkers.
Yeah, the wing walkers.
A loop and a roll, and that was it. One pilot would do a loop and a roll. Another pilot would come in and do a loop and a roll with a different airplane. Well, today, you've got these lightweight composite airplanes that can stand more G-load than a human can.
Was it like the R5s, or what are they?
The RVs.
RVs, yeah.
RVs, they're passe compared to some of the ones that can really take the abuse. RV is probably the most popular kit-built airplane in the country. There's a couple of friends of mine that are out there as a dual routine act that are they're getting booked all the time because they're so good at what they do. But there's the extras and the XLs. Some of these class of airplanes are a mid-wing monoplane, but they're lightweight carbon tube construction with carbon fiber wing coverings. An extreme, you're talking 1,100 pounds of an airplane.
Yeah.
You look at World War II and the T-6 trainer, those are 6,000 and 7,000 pound airplanes.
Well, can you pull up the T-6 trainer?
That's what my dad taught in, as the T-6s. And the extras and the XLs and some of these other airplanes, they're 1,100 pound airplanes, and a 540 horse engine strapped to that light. It's like putting a Hemi in a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
You're talking a lot of power in a lightweight airplane. And we call them now flip-flops because they do all of these. That's the modern day T6. That's the T6-2. You want to go to the North American T6 is the airplane you want to look for. It's cool that the Air Force has brought back a lot of the names of the older airplanes. Like the Lightning has been given to the new modern jets.
Yeah.
And that T6 Texan, that was a Texan too, because the original T6 was the
that's
Texan.
it, I think, right there. Isn't it on the right?
And that's the T6. Very similar in appearance to the Japanese Zero.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, at air shows, you will often see modified T6s to make them look like a Zero for the effect of the show.
Yeah.
The Zeros had because of the Japanese technology, they were covered with aluminum, but it was very brittle aluminum, and they were really easy to kill if you got the right angle on them, because that aluminum would just shatter.
Yeah.
But T-6s weren't a combat aircraft. They were a trainer. There were some, I'm sure, used in combat around the world, but
Right.
for the most part, they were designed by North American as a trainer.
Yeah, isn't that, it's a remarkable
Yeah.
to think about how old that plane is now.
Yeah, that's pre-World War II. And you see these things flying along at a couple hundred miles an hour. I remind my audience that that was the speed of war in the 1940s. You know, that was state-of-the-art aircraft for its day.
Yeah.
And
Then you have the F-35 out here over the river.
Oh, my God. Yeah. I mean,
Unreal aircraft.
and what they have done is take a lot of the responsibility off the shoulder of the pilot to
Yeah.
run that. That's where the computers come in, so the pilot can focus on the mission,
Mm-hmm.
and the computers run the airplane. You know, the pilot's still flying it,
Right.
but the computers keep track of what's going on and keep things safe. And like the F-16, this blew me away. The F-16 that the Thunderbirds fly, that was state-of-the-art in 1973. You know, that's an old fighter aircraft. And it is inherently unstable. It was designed that way because when you start designing control surfaces for stability of the airplane, you induce drag. That's a given.
Mm-hmm.
You drag the tail to keep the wings at a certain angle. Whereas the computer takes over that and is constantly modifying your control surfaces so that you get much better aerodynamics and much greater speed out of the airplane. And the computer sits there and runs the airplane. That's pretty slick.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
You know, and again, that's 1970s technology. You know, we had the Thunderbirds at our air show for the first time in '83, and that was the first year that the Thunderbirds had that airplane, and it had been in service for a few years. And I just stood there when they showed up. I'd never seen one fly till that point. And the airplane showed up. The team arrived, and I just stood there with my mouth open.
Yeah.
I'd never seen such a clean design of an airplane.
Yeah.
My God. And it was a single-purpose airplane where it was a pure fighter.
Yeah.
And they then later modified it because we don't do dogfights anymore.
Right.
But, you know, they thought that in Vietnam, that we weren't going to do dogfights anymore, so they didn't equip the F-4 Phantom with guns.
Yeah.
Well, nobody told the Chinese that.
Right. Right.
So we got into a lot of and that's what led to the development of Top Gun in the school, because they were losing too many pilots, so they had to rethink their whole training program. And it dramatically cut down the kill ratio from the enemy. So once we trained our pilots to be better pilots and put guns on the Phantoms, that helped a whole lot.
It's incredible. I couldn't imagine being like, you know, somebody at your parents' age, fly, you know, right after World War II, or even fly in World War II, train, and then live out to see, you know, an F-16.
Yeah.
I mean, what a well, you think about, I guess, same people with cars. They went from the Model A to Indy cars, you know, right around the same time frame. Just a remarkable, you know, accomplishment of that generation.
That's it.
They accomplished things that were just unfathomable for, you know, I guess defied. Well, I guess it didn't defy engineering, because that's how I guess sometimes defied probably the imagination of a lot of the public.
Yeah.
Really, of what we could accomplish. I guess, and we're going to the moon all in that time frame.
Yeah,
too.
really. And, you know, I think of my grandfather. He went from covered wagon to man on the moon in his lifetime. That was pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
When I went back to Washington, D.C. the first time, I went into the Air and Space Museum. And the first thing I looked at, you walk into the big rotunda, and there's the Wright brothers airplane hanging there. But the next thing I looked at was the rocket plane that Chuck Yeager flew, the X-1, the glamorous Glennis, that Yeager used to break the sound barrier. Okay, because that was my generation. When I went back there again, I was back there a lot for work. And one trip, I took my family. It was spring break, so I took my family and took my mom there. And the first place we went was Air and Space. And I just stood back. I wanted to see her reaction to these different airplanes. And for her, she looked at the Spirit of St. Louis, and she said, "My God, how did he do it?"
Can you look that one up, the Spirit of St. Louis?
That was,
you don't mind?
drawing a blank here on the pilot of that one.
Spirit of St. Louis?
Yeah, it was built by the Ryan Aircraft Company for him, and for that specific trip, and it was a flying gas tank. Didn't even have a windshield. That space was filled with gas.
Yeah.
So he used a periscope, or he'd kind of go into a
Oh,
slit.
yeah.
Lindbergh, Charles Lindbergh.
Yeah.
How could I forget that? But she walked in and she locked up on Lindbergh's airplane because that was her generation.
Yeah.
And then she looked at the rest of them. But that's what captured her imagination.
Lindbergh is like the old wooden props, right?
That one I think's got a metal prop on it.
Wasn't it Lindbergh props that were wood? Were they? No. For some reason, I was trying to think. If you're enjoying watching this podcast and the stories that are being told, it's not just about that. There's something bigger going on. The family of the person sitting in this chair right now will have their life story documented forever.
Our private interviews give your family the opportunity to preserve their stories and legacies indefinitely.
This opportunity is created through a comfortable experience, high quality audio and video, and a team that truly cares about the stories of the generations that lived before us.
We view this as a digital time capsule. It offers you the opportunity to preserve your family's stories, not only for now, but for generations to come.
There's something to be said about hearing stories from the individual who lived the stories, and to hear it from the cadence of their voice, with their facial expressions. We have the unique opportunity where we can do it by video call, we can do it in person in the studio, or we can pick up our studio and bring it to you.
We should never take the moments that we have with our loved ones for granted, no matter their age.
The most consistent regret I hear is that people do not record their loved ones. If you'd like to purchase the opportunity for you or your loved one to sit down in our studio, do a video recording with us, or for us to come to you, please check out www.wrinkledwisdom.org. That's www.wrinkledwisdom.org.
Thank you for supporting the podcast. Now back to the episode.
You said you were headed over to Washington, D.C. for work. What were you doing over there for
I
work?
was working at Hanford by then.
Okay.
And I'd worked for Kona for 16 years, and I was just starting to get tired of the day-to-day grind of news gathering around here. It had I just lost my enthusiasm for it, and I needed to change. I didn't want to leave the community. My wife had a good career. God, my kids were able to walk to school.
Yeah.
I lived up on Desert Plateau in that unique home, and I didn't want to leave the area. And I got a phone call from the guy that ran the media relations office at Westinghouse, which was a site manager at the time, asking if I'd consider coming over for an interview. And they'd written the job description to match my skill set. And so I kind of had the edge. And after I thought about it for a few days, I said, yeah, I'll do it. Because, like I said, I'm just getting tired. They offered me incredibly more money than I was making at Kona, but it wasn't the money that attracted me. It was the new opportunities. And that was in 1989, right at the beginning of cleanup. The tri-party agreement got signed in May of 89, and I went to work out there in July.
Oh, okay.
And part of my task was to tell the story of cleanup. The whole Northwest hated Hanford because they found out the government had lied. Department of Energy did not go into cleanup willingly. It was forced with the threat of a lawsuit over its head. Well, DOE and the state of Washington didn't want a judge making the decisions about cleanup. So the two agencies with the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, the three of them hammered out the tri-party agreement between DOE, the state of Washington, and the EPA as to what was going to get cleaned up, when it was going to get done. They had the deadlines in there, recognizing that nobody understood the complexity of cleanup out there.
Yeah.
They were thinking 30 years is more than enough time to get the job done. Here we are 35 years later, and we haven't glassified any waste yet in the tanks. Most of cleanup is backhoe and dump truck.
Yep.
They were originally thinking we could use Hanford as an environmental research park and learn from our experience out there on how to clean up so that we get more than just clean sand back for our effort. But that was becoming an impediment to progress. And they said, no, we just need to get this done as quick as we can.
Yeah.
So you go in with what you know. You're monitoring a contaminated piece of soil with all the technology you have available, and you're literally strip mining the contamination out of the soil. You got groundwater pumps pumping up the contaminated liquid and cleaning it. All that stuff is very straightforward. modern technology, and they're doing a good job, but it's taking far longer than anybody envisioned. And, in the early days, I can remember Sam Volpentest at which was then the Tri-City Nuclear Industrial Council. Their whole mission was to lobby for Hanford money. And Sam told me one day, is it okay to swear on this program?
Oh, yeah.
Sam said, God damn it, Mike, you can't get rid of 10,000 production jobs and replace it with 2,000 cleanup jobs and expect our economy to survive. And people were thinking cleanup meant 2 or 3 years with a couple of thousand people. And I always remembered Sam's comment because it told me that nobody understood the complexity of what we were getting into.
Yeah.
And that's why the tri-party agreement became a living document with mechanisms to change deadlines as we learn more. And it served the area very well. I mean, as I said, Department of Energy didn't go into cleanup willingly. The scientists at Hanford had tried several times over the history of Hanford to get Congress and the administration to provide money to attack that problem. And the response always was, we got a Cold War to win. And instead of cleaning it up, they built more reactors.
Yeah.
And as an historian pointed out, Hanford never went looking for that mission. This area never asked the government to put that Hanford facility there in the first place. We never asked for more reactors. Granted, the economy of this area boomed because of it and was sustained because of it, but it's not a mission that they ever went after. And then Lyndon Johnson began slowly shutting the reactors down. We went from 9 to 8 to 7, and pretty soon we're down to the last reactor. The N reactor was called, and it survived only because it produced electricity and the region desperately needed the power. The governors of Oregon and Washington went to the right people in headquarters and convinced them to keep the reactor operating. Well, they did. And the downside of that was that fuel that they used was never put into the processing plant. It was just stored underwater. Well, it was never intended to be stored for a length of time. So that created another big mess out there that they hadn't expected. But eventually the reactor was shut down. All 9 of them are shut down. Most of them are mothballed now. And that's another part of the cleanup complexity that eventually there'll be, 75 years, they might be able to go in and tear those old reactors down totally. But right now they're just sitting in there waiting for a lot of the really nasty isotopes to decay.
Yeah. Yeah, my girlfriend, she's a hazardous waste engineer out there now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she's talking about, they're trying to ship off some stuff and move things around. Well, like some things, certain states won't even let them go through their state.
That's right.
Then they'll try and move around states. Well, then you deal with winter conditions and passes and risk of accidents. And it's like you said, the complexity of that situation is just incredible. It still baffles me that, from the bomb, to think that it was just right there, and here's still that mission is still affecting this area and so many other places.
Yeah,
it's
and
remarkable.
It wasn't just the stuff we made for the bomb. That was, we only had enough for 2 bombs.
Yeah.
If we'd have stopped right then, we wouldn't be in this situation. But it was the additional reactors, the additional waste that was processed because of that, and it was produced. We got 149 single shell tanks. We've got 28 double shell tanks. There's like 56 million gallons of some of the most dangerous material on Earth to human health sitting out there.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's leaked into the soil from the single shell tanks. And the only good part of that is it's up on the plateau and the soil is sand for the most part. Well, sand has a lot of airspace in between the sand grains. So that liquid flows down into the sand and it just disperses more horizontally. And once the driving force out of the tank once it's drained out, basically, that stuff just sits there. It doesn't go anywhere. If it hasn't reached groundwater, it just sort of sits there. And they at least know where it is. Yeah. And the real nasty isotopes are strontium and cesium, and they've got a half-life of 37 years roughly. Well, we've already gone through at least 1 or 2 half-lives with that stuff.
Right.
And even after 10 half-lives, given the volume, you still got a lot of radioactive material out there, but it isn't as deadly as it was once.
Right.
It doesn't excuse anything. You still got to deal with it. There's still a problem out there, and there will be for a long time.
Long time.
And
yeah, hopefully we get some technological advances and stuff to go on. You hear about that issue often. Of course, when you're around people that work out there and stuff, a lot of concern about what's going on out there.
Yeah, there is.
But you can understand.
There was stuff that went into the river. There's a lot of stuff in the ground, and it's going to be a big challenge.
I'd like to understand how the elk antlers get so big out there. Those bull elk out there, I mean, they grow massive antlers just a couple months.
Yeah.
Way different than elk in the rest of the state.
There's enough roadkill out there that when you get a deer and elk down from a car colliding, the scientists at Patel will take the carcass and they'll do research on it and study whether these animals are taking up the radioactivity or not, or what kind of problems they're encountering. And I don't know the results of all that, but I know there have been no alarms sounded.
Yeah.
For a long time, the elk were confined pretty much to Rattlesnake Mountain, but the herd's grown so big, they're hopping the fence and coming over onto the site proper, and that's what's causing the car wrecks. And, and those animals, there's no hunting.
Right.
There's water on Rattlesnake Mountain. You don't realize it, but up on the north end is Snively Springs.
Some springs coming off of them, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where they get their water, and there's nice green lush grass up there. And I'm surprised that the herd has gotten as big as it is, because that limited food supply, but they also go over the top into the wheat fields on the backside of Rattlesnake.
Yeah, those elk, man, they can move a long distance in a short amount of time, too. It's crazy how those things can. I swear they can sniff out fresh cut grass from a mile away.
I'm sure you're right.
We used to cut hay on the farm.
Yeah.
Multiple times I'd be cutting a field, and those elk would come into the half of the field that we just started cutting. They'd be sitting there grazing.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's incredible.
And Rattlesnake, it's called the Iridland Ecology Reserve, the scientists are studying. It's one of the last undeveloped shrub steppe areas in the state where you can actually isolate it and monitor it, and there have been several fires across there. They don't really have a lot of research. They got a lot more now on what fires have done, how long it takes for that kind of thing to regenerate, sagebrush or rabbit brush, all these things that grow out there. They've got an area to research it, and that's why they don't want human incursion. That's why they don't allow limited hunts. Is that it's too important to them as a research facility out there. If you erase that, then conceivably you could run controlled hunts out there, but they want that area left pristine.
Yeah.
There was an airplane crash out there many years ago, and the owner of the plane had to bring a helicopter in to pick the wreckage off the mountain. They wouldn't let them drive in.
Huh.
It's like a wilderness area, they really preserve it.
Yeah, well, I'll have to look that up.
State.
I'll have to look that up. That's over by Rattlesnake Mountain there, huh?
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah, it was a student pilot, and he hit the mountain late in the day, and he ended up spending the night up there, and he got busted up.
Oh, he survived, though?
Yeah, he survived, and the accident was discovered by a pilot from the Yakima Firing Center that was flying into Pasco and had the radio tuned to the emergency locator frequency, and they heard the beacon going off of that airplane. And this was back, I want to say in the 70s, but yeah. No, that he wasn't trying to see elk that I remember.
Oh, wow, that's a different one.
Yeah.
Those don't look like the elk I see out there.
No,
those are too small.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite a herd of elk out there. And I've had deer out there. I've seen these big 4-point bucks. And I've been able to walk almost as close as you are to me, walk up to them before they just sort of turn around and walk away. They don't have any fear of humans. There's no reason for them to,
Did you do any hunting?
Not big game, no.
Oh, no.
I never have. I hunt a lot of birds.
Oh, do you like deer meat?
I do.
Oh, I'll give you some.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you some when we get out of here.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a couple nice bucks this year.
Oh, good.
They're good eating too.
Where'd you get them?
That's a secret. No,
Okay.
Our family's property over in the Klickitat River area.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, my dad didn't hunt big game, so I never learned to do it.
Yeah.
And I've never owned a big bore rifle.
It takes a lot to get into it. If you don't have a family member or a mentor, it's so hard to get into.
A lot of fishing.
I love hunting.
Yeah.
I love fly fishing.
Yeah. I've fly fished all over the Northwest, and doing air shows, I've been able to combine fly fishing and flying.
I love that.
So that's worked out real well.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite trips you've gone on private on your plane?
Oh,
do you still own a plane?
No, I've had 4 of them, and there's no point in owning an airplane anymore. Partly because I don't have anywhere I want to go with one.
Yeah,
and I've gone into some of the back strips of Idaho, and as well as out of here, go out over the Idaho Panhandle out of Lewiston.
Yeah,
done that, and again, most of the airports on the west side I've flown in. None of them particularly memorable. I have flown into. I'll back up. My favorite story about that is when I had my first airplane. Was when Oregon had a presidential primary that mattered, and the candidates were coming through Pendleton. So we knew what their schedule was because they were coming in on different days at different times, and we had to send in, and get credentialed and everything. But I'd fly down to Pendleton, and I had the TV news director with me, a guy named Jim Devaney. So the two of us flew down there and got the gear out of the airplane, walked over to the terminal building, and the Secret Service had a big semi-flatbed truck parked there for us. And we'd film the candidates coming off, and we get to talk to them and stuff. Okay. And after we got all set up, the candidates still hadn't arrived yet. And I think it was Reagan. So I got off and I walked through the gate, and I'm out looking at airplanes. I mean, that's what I like to do. And this Secret Service guy grabbed me and told me to get my butt back on that trailer. And if I see you off it again, I'm going to throw you in jail. And he wasn't pleasant about it. Right. He was, very intimidating. And I said, yes, sir. And the second time we went down there, we kind of had a nodding acquaintance with the Secret Service guys. But when Reagan came in, we wanted to be able to get out of there as soon as we could. And they said, you'll have to wait till a candidate is off the ground before we let you out.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So away Reagan went. And
did you get to meet him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I'll tell you, it's a rather intimidating thing when you've got the network cameras focused on you while you're asking Reagan a question.
Oh, you got to interview Ronald Reagan?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was surprising. I'm a small-town broadcaster, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't have a lot of experience like that. I mean, Idaho's Frank Church, I knew pretty well. A friend of mine was his chief of staff, and I saw him at different radio stations I worked for, so that was one thing. But when somebody like Ronald Reagan, and what his stature as an actor and a politician, he comes through, and I was asking him some agriculture questions. And we're out there on the tarmac, and I got all these reporters around me, and I tend to bully my way through so I can get the first questions in. And I start asking him a question, and I realize NBC, CBS, I mean, these guys are, I'm on their film, and we're shooting film in those days. And I'm starting to get a little bit shaky here that this has really got my attention, And I get my question out, and he's very good about answering it. And I don't have a clue what he said right now. I don't even remember. But it was about, I typically opened up with, and you're in wheat country and farm economy suffering, what are you going to do for us kind of thing? And he'd answer it. And then when it was time to leave, we had to wait until he was off the ground and gone. And then they'd let us out there and get to our airplane. Second time, and I don't remember if it was Carter or who, but the second time we came through, we were allowed to go out to our airplane and load up, but we couldn't leave until the candidate was on the airplane. By the time the third candidate came through, we were on a first-name basis with the Secret Service.
Yeah.
And they let us get out the airplane and get out of there before the candidate had even finished shaking hands.
Yeah.
And that was always fun.
Oh, that's cool. Did you get a visit with Carter, too? Did you get an interview on him?
Yep.
What was he like?
Carter, in my view, at that time was pretty weak.
Not as intimidating. Yep.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, I've heard that.
He was a very kind, sincere man.
That's what I've heard.
I thought a little bit phony compared to what he was like in later years, but that was just my initial impression. And,
Right.
Reporters are always cynical to begin with. That's their stock and trade.
Yeah.
And he was very respectful, and I was certainly respectful to him. And I was asking the same kind of questions I was asking the others. But I didn't think he had any chance of winning at that time. And then Ford came through in the same situation, and by the time, like I say, the last one came through, we were on our airplane and off the ground before the candidate were done shaking hands. Yeah.
Oh, that's really something. What a cool life experience to be able to do that.
It really was. I had a lot of great opportunities, met a lot of fun people.
Yeah.
Where WSU Tri-Cities is now, the 4 universities in the area had the Joint Center for Graduate Study, and it was to help the scientists and engineers out there stay current. And they offered night classes and even some day classes, I think, periodically. But University of Washington and Oregon, Washington State and Oregon State pooled the resources to put this graduate center in. And that has a lot to do with why WSU Tri-Cities is where it is now, because of that tie. And also had the land to grow and all that. But anyway, they had and it was sponsored by Rockwell, which was a site contractor at the time. They would do the science seminar series. They would bring in top name scientists from around the world. And we'd have a news conference with them in the morning. They'd do a presentation in the evening open to the public out there. And I don't recall everybody that went through, but I remember Richter from the Richter scale, earthquake Richter, that guy. I remember talking to him. And like I say, I don't remember any other scientists that came through, but he was one that always stuck out to me.
Yeah.
But that was always an interesting time, too. And then when Westinghouse took over the site, they did away with all that, even though we were trying to encourage them to do it.
Right.
But be that as it may, those were kind of the fun things. And, for being a small area, this area had its share of exposure to national and international talent.
It's really something, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, I always think about that. It's just so diverse, and it's just incredible. Like even I'm in tech, and I work in data centers, and just even like the other day I was out to lunch with a couple people from work, and I was sitting down with an engineer from Nigeria, India, and Belarus.
Whoa!
And then there's me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how cool is this? I'm sitting here, like at a tiny little diner in the middle of nowhere, and here we are from 4 people from all different walks of life. And it's really this area, believe it or not, because of Hanford is the reason the infrastructure is really why we're able to have all these data centers down here.
That's right.
And it's kind of the way my brain works. I'm like, man, because of that Hanford, here I get to sit here and visit with engineers from all over the world that are just incredible people.
Right.
And it's
some of the things that do stick out to me too from my time at Kona is I had not really working it for that purpose, but along the way I had developed some pretty good relationships just because I got to know people and cared about them. And one was a manager, one of the airlines out here, for example, when he called me one day and said, "Are you aware that Saudi Prince, whoever is in town?" I said, "No." I said, "He just got off one of our airplanes here a little bit ago." And I got to thinking, what would bring a Saudi prince to this area? And there's only one reason: agriculture.
Yeah.
They are tied to what was then Agri-Northwest, which translates into the Mormon Church. And I called over to Agri-Northwest headquarters and said, "Is so-and-so there?" And said, "Yeah." I said, "I'd like to come over and interview him if that'd be possible." And there was a pause and said, "Hang on," and came back and said, "Yeah, he'll talk to you as long as you don't ask about politics of his country."
Yeah.
I said, "Fine with me. I don't care about that. I want to know what their interest is in the Columbia Basin."
Yeah.
And I went over and got a great interview with him. Well, this is one of my great opportunities where I skewered the newspaper because I caught him blindsided. And by the time they could try to track him, he was gone.
Yeah.
So the ag writer at the Herald called me up and kind of went on bended knee and said, "Can you tell me what he said?" And I played my interview for him over the phone.
Oh, good for you.
He got my story. So, yeah.
Was that by any regards to giant poplar? On that side of the
No, I don't know, land changes hands around here. And this guy, they already had holdings here, and they were kind of here monitoring what was going on, getting updates from the local management. Yeah.
I live in Oregon. That giant poplar farm that was down there?
Oh, yeah.
They were trying to make ethanol out of, yeah.
Well, a lot of that went to the pulp mill.
It was sold to the Saudis?
Yeah, no, it was long before that.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, the poplar trees, I thought they were aspens also, but those were being grown for the paper mill, I was told.
Yeah, I think they were. They were using paper mill, and then they were trying to make ethanol out of the byproduct of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was going to college when they were growing that. And
because they had them down there, and they had quite a number of big plots on the Franklin County side of the Snake River.
Yeah, going down towards Burbank.
Yeah.
Yeah, or past Burbank. Yeah.
Yeah, they had a lot of them out there. So.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it makes you. It's sneaky out here. You know, like there's just so much going on. Even like, you know, people fly in from all over the country. Well, sometimes the world at work. And they're like, where can we go see? And I'm like, Palouse Falls. You know, you got to go to Palouse Falls because people, you know, this area, I don't know if you know, has been getting a lot of attention from like Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock about the scab lands and the Missoula floods and how this whole area was formed.
Right.
It's been getting a lot of attention, you know, in that realm of journalism. And it's pretty remarkable, actually, what's going on. Well, you know, I mean, you've flown enough out here that when you get up in the air around here, it's incredible, especially if you go up the gorge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unreal.
And there are Facebook pages that focus on the scab lands that I follow. Because I know the guy, Bruce Bjornstand, is a guy that has a lot of stuff on that site.
Oh, cool.
And he was a geologist out here at Battelle.
Oh, okay.
And it's fun to look at some of that stuff. And I'm always learning about it.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm super interested in it. I've driven through it enough that I'd like to figure out what's going on around here.
One thing I think I ought to mention to you has to do with the air show here.
Oh, yeah.
There used to be an airport in Kennewick, Vista Field, out by Columbia Center, and that was a Navy training base during World War II, where they replicated a aircraft carrier deck so pilots could practice landing on it out there, and then they put in a full paved runway. Okay, so when they leave, they turn it over to the city and to the port of Kennewick. The two agencies wanted to close the airport in the early 70s, and the Experimental Aircraft Association, which pretty much hangared its planes out there, and I did too. I had my first plane there. We didn't want the airport to close, so a buddy of ours, in fact, he was a chief engineer at KONA, said, well, why don't we do an air show out there? Because nobody knows about the airport. So we thought that'd be a good idea. Yeah. So we put together an air show out there for 2 years in 76 and 77. And it totally turned around the attitude of Kennewick people toward that airport. They thought, well, this is worth keeping. So the city council backed away from closure. In fact, passed a resolution to keep it open.
Oh, okay.
So we were pretty successful. But I always wanted a big air show, something bigger than we could do at Kennewick. And I wanted to do something at Pasco, and I didn't have a clue what it meant to run an air show at that time. And Rockwell had just come to town as a brand new contractor. And a pilot named Bob Hoover was been the test pilot for them, and he was in other roles by then. But Bob Hoover was one of the most renowned pilots in the history of aviation. In fact, when Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier, it was Bob Hoover flying the chase plane.
Oh, cool.
And this guy in the air show world was God. And I said, after we got done with the news conference, the Rockwell guy was a little guy named Sam Icabellis, had a patch over one eye. And I went up to him and said, new kid on the block here, why don't you do the community a favor and sponsor Bob Hoover in here for an air show? I didn't tell him we didn't have an air show. He just thought that'd be a good idea. So he looked at the local Rockwell manager and said, why don't you make that happen? He didn't like it because Hoover's fee was going to come out of his budget.
Yeah.
Because they thought they could just, since Bob worked for him, they'd just send him in to fly. Well, it didn't work that way. Bob's air show business was separate. So anyway, I had Bob Hoover, and I went over to the Water Follies and said, look, if I can get the EAA to provide the manpower, will you put up the money to do an air show? They thought that was a good idea. So I went to the Experimental Aircraft Association and said, guys, got the Water Follies money. I got Bob Hoover as a headliner. You want to come over to Pasco and do an air show? And that was 1978. And that worked out really well. We did a show in 78. Of course, I'm submitting the paperwork to get a jet team, and it got ignored. 79, we did the same thing, another air show, and it was pretty popular, and Water Follies paying for it, and no jet team, and get a little bit of military support. In 1980, the same thing, and I'm getting frustrated because I was thinking, someday we're going to get fair evaluation here and we'll get a jet team. Well, I didn't realize that's not quite how it works. And somebody made the mention of having political intervention to get what you want. And the only person I knew that had the horsepower with our political people was Sam Volpentest at Tridec. And I went over and talked to him, and he said, you send letters to Warren Magnuson and Henry Jackson and let them know we talked, and I think something will happen there. And he may have contacted him unbeknownst to me, I don't know. But at the time, Jackson chaired the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Magnuson chaired the Senate Appropriations Committee. They were the two most powerful men in the U.S. Senate.
Yeah.
And when they told the Blue Angels, rather, to go to Pasco, I got a call from the Blue Angels telling me how thrilled they were to come to Pasco.
Yeah.
And it was only a one-day show. They'd done Saturday up in Montana and Sunday in Pasco. They hated doing split weekend shows because of the work involved to move. But when they left here, they said, this is absolutely the best air show we've ever had.
Oh, good for you.
So they invited themselves back the next year. Well, I didn't want them back the next year. I wanted the Thunderbirds. I wanted to get into a rotation of every other year. And when this guy from the Blues called me, I remember him well, Bud Hunsucker was his name. Bud called me up and he said, we want to come back. But it'll be in August. And he said, I'm thinking about this. He said, the Thunderbirds will never come on your weekend because they're committed to Chicago. That's in ink every year. They go to Chicago that weekend. So you either take us in August or you won't have a jet team. Well, that made a real easy decision. I said, Bud, we'd love to have you back. Okay, so that was 82. And it was a good decision ultimately because 82 is when the Thunderbirds team crashed down in training at Nellis. They lost the 4 planes in an accident while they were training. And we wouldn't have had a jet team if we'd have tried to get the Thunderbirds. Well, the Thunderbirds came to us in 83, and that was their first year with the F-16s.
Oh, cool.
Couldn't have worked out better. And then we got the Blue Angels back in 84. We had the Thunderbirds back in 85. And we were getting the Canadian Snowbirds down here. And, we were getting the jet teams frequently. Well, the Navy switched up the airplanes to the F-18s, and our field wasn't big enough. And then the military in general changed its requirements for the jet teams for what you have to have on the ground, resting gear, equipment, all kinds of stuff. So we kind of fell off the jet team schedule. And I think it was like the 25th or 30th anniversary of the boat race. And I'm sitting in, Ken Maurer ran the boat race at that time through his ad agency in Pasco. And he said, we really need to do some kind of a blockbuster event for our anniversary. And I think it was our 25th. Said, we really need to have this blockbuster event. And I said, well, why don't we just roll the air show into the boat race? They do it at Seattle. They do it at St. Louis. They do it at other places. And Ken had been to all those venues. So he said, that seems like a pretty good idea. Why don't you make that happen? So I get the paperwork approved through the FAA to set up the aerobatic box over the river. And I hired a bunch of acts. And it was really slick because we didn't have to worry about the crowd.
Already there.
And didn't have to rent toilets and all this other stuff that goes with doing it at the airport. And that's what led to the air show over the river.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You ever, do you ever think about how many people's lives you touch with that air show?
No, not in those terms, no.
Do you know how many kids sit outside their yard when those planes come over the top here to make their loops? I mean, my daughter and her friends are some of them. That's remarkable.
They
never forget that stuff.
That's cool. And especially like the solo jet demonstrations that we've had here for the last few years.
Oh my gosh.
Those are women flying those airplanes.
Really?
And
That
yeah,
F-35
yeah,
is
those are women flying those airplanes.
real.
And I'm so excited about that because, as I've said, my mom was an aviation pioneer in the 30s. So I'm very sensitive to women in aviation in general. We don't have enough women flying air shows. We don't have enough women in the military. And like one old codger told me when he was complaining about, don't have enough women flying. And I said, well, look, you've got a pilot on the Blue Angels. You got a woman pilot in the Thunderbirds. He said, I'll believe in equality when I see a woman leading those teams.
Yeah.
We haven't had a woman leading the Blues or Thunderbirds yet.
Yeah.
And I hope I live long enough to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, they're really doing remarkable things. They, like they say too, like the female's attention to detail on a majority compared to other, like to men. Mm-hmm. They say like, well, I know Walt Disney said this. That's why a lot of his movies were the colors were so incredible and things for its time because he had women doing the art and then doing a lot of the costumes on a lot of the attractions. But that's something where aviation is you need such an intense level of detail.
Yeah.
And I follow actually a couple of female pilots on social media, and it's pretty remarkable what they're up to. I just saw one where one girl just crashed as a student pilot, and she didn't let it slow her down.
Wow.
Yeah, she something happened to her plane when she was taking off, but yeah, I just saw her. She's back to flying. I think she's not very old. Yeah. I'm excited that we got to sit down here and visit with you because I think I didn't know that. I didn't know much about you. I'd never met you before, and a friend ran into you, which I appreciate him reaching out to you. But I think there's something about aviation, man, with kids. There's something, even in the mix it with the boat show, you think about boats, like, to go like the human advancement, be out on the water screwing around like that at that speed and then through the air. It's really remarkable that you have those two things together around here. Yeah. Because the kids love it. I mean, we have kids in the house all the time and they never forget that.
When I narrate air shows about halfway through after a particular stunning performance of a pilot, say, hey kids, show of hands, how many of you want to be a pilot when you grow up? And all these kids are sticking their hand. I said, I'm sorry to tell you, you can't do both. Yeah. I said, these pilots are kids. They're big kids, and these airplanes are toys. So if you want to be a pilot, don't grow up.
Oh, I love that.
Play with it. Have fun with it.
Maybe that's why Peter Pan flies.
There you go. Yeah. That's it.
Oh, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
Well, we're probably getting, where are we at? Okay. Well, before we go, and we can do this again if you want. If you think of other things you want to talk about, you're more than welcome to come back. But we always ask our interviewees if they could give a piece of advice to the younger generations. What's something that you value or a core belief that you've used or passed on?
I guess I quote the guy from Viking Longships that says, stay curious.
Yeah. And
follow your dream. I've found too many people that have said, oh, I wanted to do that, but I never did, Well, if you want to do it, you can make it happen. It's just like being a pilot. If you want to be a pilot, you can be a pilot. It's up to you. It goes back to when I was quoting Mike Schwenk about WSU Tri-Cities. We have a branch campus because we wanted it. Everybody in the Tri-Cities wanted it. That was our dream. And enough people made it happen. Yeah. So if you want it, you can do it.
I love hearing that, because it breaks my heart when I hear people that are older say, I wish I would have done that. Yeah. I know somebody who's an engineer and they told me, they said, I feel like I should have done something more arts or music. And when he said it, I kind of was like, man, I almost kind of got I was like, man, I didn't want to, so I don't want to do that. When he said that to me, it kind of hit me like, I'm going to make sure and not do that. I think that's really important. Also, I appreciate you saying that too, because it's weird now when you talk to people, even just like what Wayne and I and our friend Dallas, we're doing here, building this studio, doing all this stuff. People act like you've achieved something, some miracle, and you realize it. Like they're like, yeah, but you did it. Yeah. Like you said you were going to do it and you did it. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, is it that rare? Is it that rare that people are, not following through with something that they dreamt up and I hope that comes back around with a little bit of inspiration and it takes a lot of support, I understand, and a good friend group, but.
Yeah, pieces have to fall in place. Sometimes you go after it. Sometimes it happens. In my case, it just sort of happened. I didn't set out as a goal after college to go work at Hanford.
Yeah.
But, pieces fell into place and I grabbed the opportunity. And when I look back on my career as a broadcaster as well as at Hanford, I can truly say I made a difference. When people wanted to know what was happening in the Tri-Cities, like Mount St. Helens, they turned on KONA. I don't know how many kids I've seen over time that my folks used to listen to you on the radio every morning.
Yeah.
That made me feel good.
I bet.
And I've had people tell me they could never figure out my political persuasion because my news coverage was always balanced.
Yeah.
And that made me feel good.
I've
got my own beliefs, but I made sure they didn't interfere with telling the story accurately.
Yeah.
And even at Hanford, where we focused when I first went out there, our communication strategy, we wanted to get positive press in the publications that Congress read. New York Times, Washington Post. I spent a lot of time focusing on those publications, and I'll tell you, it's sobering when you're walking down the street to the Washington Post and you're about to walk in the front door and you look up Washington Post and you realize just about what you're going to encounter. These are the people that brought down the president.
Yeah.
You better be careful or it's career limiting. I had a New York Times reporter on the site one day, and he couldn't say nuclear industry with about 4 nasty words in front of it. And we're way out on the north end of the site. There's not a car anywhere, and he's ranting on. And I slammed on the brakes on the car, and I said, damn it, you've got to realize we're not in the nuclear industry out here. We are in the environmental restoration business. And if you want to talk the nuclear industry, I'm going to put you on a plane and send you home. You want to talk about what we're doing for cleanup, talk to you till the cows come home. But knock that crap off.
Good for you.
And he sat there and he stared at me, and I'm thinking, either I'm dead meat or, and he said, you're right. I've got to rethink this.
Yeah.
And that was a turning point because from then on, I could get positive stories, sometimes even on the front page of the New York Times. And the key to our communication strategy out there was always tell the truth. The government lied to this area for so long. We had a hell of a problem turning that around. But the more reporters we interacted with, and one guy told me, I'm amazed that you're as open and honest about what's out here. And I said, my company didn't create this mess.
Right.
We're hired to clean it up. It's public record. We have to know how extensive this contamination is out here, and the public has to know it. Otherwise, we're never going to get the support we need. And you look at the time we started cleanup, the budget was well under $1 billion. Today, it's over $3 billion.
Wild.
And every president, Republican and Democrat, since the beginning of cleanup, has tried to cut the Hanford budget. And the congressional delegations of all of the nuclear states would rally, and they would prevent that from happening. And yeah, the budgets took a little bit of a cut over time, but they've always been restored. And you think how remarkable it is for Congress to maintain that level of funding for a single project over all this time. I mean, it's astounding.
Yeah.
And the budget's still growing out there. It has to, because what's being cleaned up now and where the focus is the plant that's going to turn that nuclear waste into glass.
Yeah.
They're just in the initial testing phase of that. And it's going to be
that plant?
Yeah, there's to be several more years. But the thing is,
do you know what I heard?
What's that?
I heard that they don't have seismic bracing on that plant.
I don't know.
And they're having to go back. And
I would be careful about spreading too many rumors about that, because I'm not sure. It could be.
Yeah.
I have no knowledge.
When they designed it, it didn't. Yeah. And now it's a requirement.
Yeah, I can't even speak to that. What I can tell you is the infrastructure needed to move the waste. A lot of that waste is 7 miles away.
Yeah.
They got to move it, and they don't have the infrastructure to do it yet. that's going to be another expensive proposition, another big budget buildup to get that equipment in place.
What's neat about those projects, though, is the pressure of necessity. Who knows what they'll come up with? What kind of technology, what engineering feats they'll come up with? I mean, I think that something always comes out of those types of projects. That, like, look at NASA. I mean, that's why we have sunglasses. Like NASA invented sunglasses.
Yeah,
a lot of people don't know that, but because they needed them, going up into space.
Yeah,
and it's pretty remarkable to see what they come up with. Well, I appreciate your time.
Sure,
a lot. If you ever want to do it again, you're more than welcome.
Thank you. You get any ideas you want to talk about, specifics, give me a holler.
All right, we will.